Children of the Matrix, Chapter 14, The Illusion of Power. What if most of what humanity calls power is actually fear? One of the deepest themes in this chapter of Children of the Matrix is the difference between real power and the illusion of power. Because modern society often defines power through control. Control over people, control over resources, control over perception, and control over identity. But honestly, the more I reflected on this chapter, the more I realized how much external power is often rooted in inner insecurity, fear of losing control, fear of being powerless, fear of uncertainty. And maybe awakening begins the moment someone realizes true power was never domination, it was consciousness. Let's go there. This chapter made me think deeply about how society defines power. Money, status, authority, influence, and control. From a young age, people are taught that power means dominance, being above others, winning, controlling outcomes, controlling perception. And because of that conditioning, many people spend their lives chasing external validation as proof of worth. That's huge. Because external power can still coexist with inner instability. And maybe that's why so many powerful people appear profoundly disconnected from themselves. One thing this chapter points out strongly is control often grows from fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing identity, fear of being exposed. And human beings often attempt to control externally what they do not feel internally. That's profound, because domination and consciousness are not the same thing. People who need control constantly are often trying to create psychological safety through external structure. And maybe awakening begins when people stop confusing control with strength. Another huge theme I reflected on while reading this chapter is how many beings unconsciously give their power away to authority, to approval, to fear, to external validation. People begin believing someone else defines their worth, their identity, their truth. And over time, self-trust weakens. That's important because sovereignty requires reclaiming inner authority, not blindly rejecting everything outside yourself, but no longer abandoning yourself internally. This chapter also made me think about ego. The ego often seeks through comparison, being superior, being admired, being validated. But that kind of power is unstable because it depends entirely on external reinforcement. And the moment validation disappears, identity destabilizes. That's why external power often creates anxiety instead of peace, because the ego constantly fears losing what it's built itself upon. That's exhausting. And maybe awakening means discovering a form of power not depending on external approval. The deeper I sat with this chapter, the more I realized real power may actually be internal: self-awareness, presence, discernment, integrity. The ability to remain conscious under pressure. The ability to stay connected to yourself without collapsing into fear or performance. That feels powerful. Because real power doesn't need constant domination. It doesn't need constant validation. It comes from alignment, and alignment creates stability. One thing this chapter really brought up for me is many people abandon themselves trying to gain approval or control. They disconnect from intuition, truth, and authenticity just to maintain acceptance or safety. That's painful because eventually people can gain external success while feeling internally empty. And maybe awakening begins the moment someone realizes no external power is worth losing yourself for. That changes everything. My biggest takeaway from this chapter is this: much of what humanity calls power is actually fear trying to control uncertainty, Maybe real power begins when someone no longer needs domination, approval, or external validations to feel whole. Because consciousness itself may be the deepest form of power humanity can access. Maybe true power was never about controlling others. Maybe it begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself. If this resonates, subscribe and share. I'm walking chapter by chapter through Children of the Matrix, through consciousness, sovereignty, and awakening. And tell me in the comments, what do you think real power actually is? Thanks for watching, everybody.